So we've been chatting about AI agents quite a bit. I think it's a good time where we can sort of record a conversation, done a bit of hands-on work. So we have a little bit of a show and tell as well. I'll bring up my screen later in the conversation and we can see an agent at work. But essentially what we've been talking about over the last couple months, I'd say, is the whole idea of AI workflows and how they're getting agentic over time with the advent of the large language models. And at some point, while trying to build these agentic workflows, I noticed a switch. It stops feeling like an automated workflow and starts feeling more like an assistant.
Yeah, and I would say you had more success in setting up that agent. And maybe we can start with defining what those terms are and the benefits of each one, as well as the effort required to set them up as well. Because it's a very common debate if you were to do a search of AI agents versus automated workflow, then there is another element of agentic AI. Uh, there is a good amount of overlap with each of these concepts, and people sometimes use them interchangeably, but they have a different purpose. They are different aspects of workflows that can be built. So I'm very excited to see the workflow that you built because as I was building my own AI agent, I was hitting certain limits, but you were able to set up an end-to-end workflow, which I'm excited about. But maybe we start with the basics and we can start with the very simple automated workflow, which has been around for a long time. And I like the terms that come to mind or the companies are like Zapier, we had IFTTT, where it's as simple as if A happens, then B happens. It's a very reliable, predictable workflow that you're able to set up. There isn't a whole lot of intelligence there. Like it's purely based on a trigger response setup.
Yeah. And then came the LLMs and they threw a wrench in the works and the automation party became wilder and we started adding more intelligence to these workflows, right? And the way I see it, LLMs, they provided two key new aspects to workflows. One is they change the way an end user can interact with these agents. So instead of a fixed structural input, it became more natural language conversations, right? And the other big thing that LLMs provide is a brain, like a general purpose intelligence that you can kind of insert anywhere in that workflow and make it do some intelligent stuff. But then the moment I actually tried to build a proper agent. When I say a proper agent, I mean one in which it's not a workflow with multiple steps. Rather, it is giving a sort of job description or a system message which describes everything that this agent needs to do, and then connect tools and just let that model decide what needs to be done. And I think that was the point where I pivoted from thinking about it as just a spectrum of going from deterministic workflows to agentic workflows to something that felt concretely different from an automated workflow.
Yeah, you described it well. It's about how agentic or how intelligent that workflow needs to be. And then that determines the setup. Because I'm thinking back to one of my early journeys where I was exploring uh, what this can do itself. And like I had created a very simple web app where if you were to fill out a form on that web app, the workflow would send an email to the recipient that, hey, the form has been received, which is a very simple workflow because based on the information that's received, an email is triggered. But the agentic part was utilizing a chatbot that is writing or composing the emails. If you have five different people completing that web form, they all do receive the email, which is a very simple workflow. But the content of the email is customized uh, by this LLM model. Like I didn't define like what the customization needs to be. It is possible that it just copies and pastes this in the same email to everyone, but
Yeah.
it didn't have any restrictions. All it had to do was compose an email with no boundaries attached and then send that email. So the only intelligence piece was figuring out what the email should include, the body and the content, and that's about it. Everything else was just a very simple workflow.
Yeah. And so to make it more agentic, you're relinquishing control to the artificial intelligence in a number of different ways. Maybe you're letting it kind of decide on its own what that email needs to be instead of giving it like a fixed template to fill out. Or you kind of let the agent decide what tool to use. So maybe you have different ways of sending messages out there. You have emails, You could send a message on Slack. So maybe you let the agent decide whether this piece of communication even needs to be an email, right? Maybe it's better off as a Slack message. And so that's kind of what we mean by agentic behavior. We're kind of letting go of the control and a lot of these points in that workflow and kind of just letting the AI decide.
I think with AI deciding, like it essentially like comes down to pattern recognition that it's able to make an act on it. That's essentially how I understand it. It's just it's looking at patterns, it's acting on those patterns, and it's optimizing or learning based on what happens as a result of that. So you're giving it more control, as you said. You're letting it decide more, plan more, adapt more. And as a result of that, it becomes more powerful. Is of course risk associated with it because we have all read about hallucinations as well. So I think it has its benefits for sure, where you let it take more initiative and sometimes it may hallucinate or perhaps make some mistakes, which you may not make because you have more context for a given situation. So perhaps like we can get into what you have built and that allows to unpack the different parts of it. And I'm sure like as you share, I'll have like more questions in terms of what you did and why you did and what is this workflow doing.
All right, let's get into it.
I would say like NIDENS is no longer a black box for me because it was.
Yeah, and it's so amazing to work with N8N because it's so visual and like this is not a paid advertisement for N8N by any measure, but it just gives you such a good idea. Like it makes you visualize what that agent is doing behind the scenes. So it's been a great experience building with N8N. But anyway, let's get on with the demo. So this is a little meeting follow-up assistant. You've just had a meeting. You've just recorded that meeting. We have bazillion tools which enable you to record meetings and generate transcripts now. So you take whatever your favorite note taker AI is, you take the transcript from that, and you throw it into this meeting follow up agent. And I've given it the ability to do two things. One is to generate meeting notes from that meeting and send it out over email. And the other thing is, which is the interesting part that makes it pretty agentic, is the AI decides whether a follow up meeting has been discussed. And if any follow up meeting has been discussed and finalized, it should go ahead and create that meeting on the calendar. And the way to use it is this simple chat interface. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a fake meeting transcript, which I tried to make as realistic as possible, by the way. It's about two people who've just had a meeting about a podcast. So this is Emily and Sam. It could have been Mohit and Shivam, but I thought that might get confusing. But they have a meeting about recording a podcast and they talk about a bunch of stuff. And towards the end, they discuss a follow up meeting. Sam says something like, how about this Friday afternoon? And if that's too tight, next Monday. And Emily's like, Friday's a little bit too ambitious for my first pass. Let's aim for the next Monday around 1 p.m. And so Sam's like, perfect. Okay, Monday, September 1st, 1 p.m. I'll be sure to block that off. So there's a conversation. A couple of dates have been kind of thrown around, but the agent should be kind of smart enough to decide what the finalized meeting was, right? So I'm gonna submit this to the agent. It's gonna start processing the transcript, and I think it's really up to it how to use the tools, in what order to use the tools. It can go by the order I've given it in the system message, or it could just pick its own order. But the idea is I don't really care. I just want meeting notes and I want follow-up meetings to be created. So the output it gave me here, that kind of gives me a good idea of whether it did the job or not. It says the meeting was focused on the future of work podcast, that fictitious podcast. Meeting overview. It gave the key discussion points, action items, and we'll see if it has sent this over email in a second. But let's see next steps. A follow-up meeting was identified and it's scheduled for Monday, September 1st. So I think it worked. Let's go and check. So I checked the email. We got the meeting notes. So
Nice.
that's great. Let's go to the calendar. Next Monday, September 1st, 1 to 2 p.m. Okay, so we have the meeting on the calendar.
Yes, I was able to extract the decisions made in a very clear set of bullet points as well as what the next steps were. And it went one step beyond that. It also set up the next meeting on the calendar and send out the invites to everyone. So it's like this is essentially like an AI companion from Zoom plus Calendly uh, in one flow.
Yeah, pretty much. And if this was an AI workflow, see, if this wasn't an agent and if it was an AI workflow, the way it would work was I would probably have to upload a transcript. And then I would think about adding an LLM in the next step to process that transcript and figure out what the meeting notes are. And then I could add another step in which I ask the LLM to figure out if there are any follow up meetings required. And then it would crunch the thing and figure out whether any follow up meeting was decided. And then I would add another step in which I would tell it to send out that email. And then maybe there's a conditional node if meeting is identified. Then I would create that meeting on the calendar. And so you would have an AI workflow. You could get this job done just the way we've seen it right now. You would be adding different LLM steps. But in making this an agent, it can handle like very human types of input. It can handle a variance in the input and intelligently decide what it needs to do without getting stuck in that rigid process, right? So I was thinking of an example, and a good example is I just prompted saying, what is the day of the week on the 3rd of September, 2025? Okay, so it wasn't able to answer that, but the way that it handled it was good. Like I didn't specifically tell it to handle any error and say that I cannot do this or my capabilities are limited. It just was able to respond in a very natural way, right? And if I say, what is today's date, it knows this, and it's part of this system prompt where I give it a date so that it knows what next Tuesday means. And that's why it was able to create a meeting
Hmm.
for next Monday. And so it's able to actually answer this question. So the concept of it being like more of an assistant, which has a job description, it can tell me what capabilities it doesn't have. And if it does have that capability, it can, to the best of its ability, answer my question. And so it kind of feels to me less like an automated workflow and more like an assistant with a job description. And I think that's the key distinction, which, after having experimented with this, I would personally make between an AI workflow and an AI agent.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So it is able to make decisions and act on certain inputs that it's receiving, even if that action isn't super clear. Because in the transcript, there was a conversation about different days the meeting could be held. There was a bit of a back and forth, but it was able to at least pick up on what was the final day that and time that was agreed upon and act on it and not get confused or lost in the conversation that was happening. It was able to pick on today's date, but it is not able to look at like what the day of the week is for any future date. But I'm assuming that if you gave it some more guidance in terms of how you go about determining the day of the week, like if it's also able to do that. And that's the idea. It's like going back to what you said earlier, it's about how agentic it should be. It's not a binary. It's like how much control do you want to give it?
Yeah. And we can kind of try to see how intelligent it is. So what I'll do is I'll put in this transcript again and try to change the conversation a little bit so that
Yeah.
a meeting wasn't finalized. And then it should be able to handle it. And the day of the week thing, yeah, I'm not really sure why it couldn't answer this day of the week question. I'm sure if in the transcript it didn't say September 1st and it just said next Monday, it should be able to handle that as well.
I think it's to say, right? Like its capabilities are limited to like summarizing meeting decisions, scheduling meetings. So it's less
Yeah.
about the task itself. It's about like the tasks that it can and cannot perform. So I think the boundaries that we defined, like if you scroll down, it does say like what are the tasks it is able to perform. Even though asking a day of the week is a simple task, it's just not within the responsibilities it has been trained for, which is meeting transcripts, notes, sending emails, and scheduling events. So in other words, if the task, no matter how simple it is, falls outside of these capabilities, it doesn't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
And that's defined by the system message. If the system
exactly.
message has given it those responsibilities, but we could pick, like, there was another time discussed for the meeting which Emily refused. And so, like, let's see how it handles that. What if I wanted to ask, what was the other time for the meeting that Sam proposed? Sam proposed this coming Friday in the afternoon as an alternative to the Monday meeting.
Nice.
So, like in an AI workflow, how would you handle this input? It's not, even if you put in LLM steps, I don't think it's going to be able to kind of intelligently figure out what the user wants and just use all the information and tools at its disposal to answer the question to the best of its ability, like a helpful assistant could, right? And so, no matter how you build it in the back end, if it doesn't significantly improve the experience of the end customer, it's pointless. But in this case, I think agents in this format significantly improve the experience because they make things so much more flexible and less rigid. But let's go ahead and put that transcript again. I'll just to avoid confusion, I'll delete that meeting off the calendar. And so let's say Sam and Emily were having this conversation and they had pretty much finalized this date. But right at the end, instead of Sam saying perfect, so that's Monday, September 1st at 1 p.m., what if Sam said instead that, oh, sorry, I just realized I have something else scheduled at that time. And I'll let you know by the end of the day. Right. Let's see how it handles that. Okay. So emails containing the above meeting notes were sent. So it did send the email, but the calendar event status, it said no calendar event was created as the time is not yet confirmed. That's exactly what we wanted it to do. So we can check whether it did send out the meeting notes, which is great, but no meeting on the calendar.
What if we ask it the same question about in the conversation you had asked what meeting times were proposed, even though it knows that no meeting time was confirmed? Like, can it summarize what meeting times were discussed?
Yeah. Let's see. Can you summarize what meeting times were discussed? All right. That makes sense. And I
Yeah.
think that also lets me set it up, even though there wasn't a meeting finalized. I could go ahead and tell it to set up that meeting tentatively anyway. Okay, so set up the meeting, or I don't know if it would understand setup. Say schedule the meeting for next Monday anyway. I'll highlight that it is tentative and Sam must confirm. Let's see. Not bad. I think it did it. Set up a half-hour meeting. I don't know if the length of the meeting was discussed or not, but it put a half-hour meeting on the calendar. It says tentative, and it says Sam to confirm availability. That's perfect. Like that's kind of what I would expect from a person, like a human assistant, right?
Yeah, for sure. One of the reasons I was laughing with like the Emily proposed, Sam suggested, Emily proposed, Sam confirmed is it's almost like if there's a conflict in a meeting, it can like break it down if like who said what. Because that I don't know why
Yes.
that came to mind.
So whose fault is it that a meeting has not been scheduled? It will give you the answer.
Yeah, you could use it in any way you want. But I think that's what, so like, the one word that comes to mind is like the is that an AI agent is quite flexible. Where again, if you it was an automated workflow, then it would be reliable because it is acting on a certain trigger. It acts and that's all it does. It executes, it doesn't think. But in this case, you are able to have it perform different tasks as the meeting transcript is changing. So if the meeting time is confirmed, it just goes ahead and sets up a meeting. If the meeting times are not confirmed, it doesn't act on it in the sense it doesn't create a next meeting, but it will still send the summary of the current meeting. But if there is a tentative ask, it still goes ahead and schedules that meeting, and it would highlight that this is a placeholder or a tentative session where Sam in this case has to confirm. So it's able to adapt itself in different ways with the same set of workflow, if you will, that you created, because you add an element of memory, you add an element of AI agentic that it's able to act on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good point. It was able to decide with every input that I gave it whether it needs to use a tool or not. Like it can skip steps if it thinks that that particular step doesn't make sense for this input. For example, the last one, when it had already sent the meeting notes and I just asked it to schedule the meeting anyway, this time it shouldn't have sent the meeting notes again. And
Mm,
so I hope if I refresh, yeah, it didn't
nice.
send the email this time. And all it did was put up the event on the calendar. So that's pretty neat. Like I would rather work with AI agents or workflows like this than strictly deterministic or automated workflows, even those that are AI powered. I would still rather have an assistant be able to handle any kind of query and even tell me when it cannot do something. But I was also thinking sometimes things can get too agentic. So an
Yeah.
extreme is if like I just give a broad outcome for the agent and I say, okay, you have all these tools at your disposal. This is all the information that I have on, let's say, the whole company. I want you to go ahead and increase revenue. I don't know if there's any agent that could handle queries like that, right?
Yeah, it really depends on what you're looking for. Because if you were to ask ChatGPT, I'm sure it'll have an answer. Because I've never seen a scenario where it doesn't have an answer, even if that answer makes sense or not. I think it's
Yeah.
just about like how relevant the output is, and then what context you provided. But I was thinking like the other way. I was like thinking like how if you want to make it more agentic, then you could, and in that case, it may proactively tell you that hey, even though no meeting time was decided upon, I will go ahead and set up a tentative meeting, and 3 days before the meeting, it may send an email to Sam or even to the entire meeting audience, reminding them of the upcoming session and asking people to confirm and prepare for it. Like that would be taking the agentic part a couple levels higher, and
Yeah.
that way it's doing that because we all know that we meeting calendars get full, things come up, and a reminder of what's coming is always helpful. And the more agentic you make it, the more it can do, and it may start doing that as well.
Yeah. I'd love to add more tools to it and see like how far can you go with an assistant like this. But I think, yeah, the capabilities are present. I think today we do have enough intelligence from these large language models and enough tools to let it help with fairly complicated use cases, like you suggested, with meeting conflicts on calendars and such, and deciding whether to send an email or a Slack message. I think that requires a fairly high amount of intelligence, but I think we're already there today.
Yeah, and like my biggest takeaway is that with these tools like N10 and others at disposal, you can explore on your own. You try layering different AI agents with small workflows, you experiment, and you document what works or doesn't work. And that way you're able to just like even think through what's possible and how you can use it for something as simple as a better meeting scheduler, or it could be synthesizing meeting notes, or things that are a lot more chaotic, like customer feedback, which would come from different people in different shapes and forms. And but you can build these pieces to extract that information and then act on it. So I think exploring on your own is the biggest takeaway that I've had. As I shared very early on, that I was hitting different limits, but it didn't stop my learning. I was able to not create something that was useful, but I was able to see what works or doesn't work. I kept just moving on from like tool to tool, which was maybe a mistake on my part. I should have just maybe because the tool wasn't the problem. Maybe the problem was like my own learning itself. The exploration was still fun.
I think both the building as well as using, they're both fun, which is kind of rare. And it's an amazing time that we're living in where we can both be a consumer as well as easily build software that we wanna consume. So yeah, it's been a pretty great journey getting to this point of having a good understanding of how to work with, build agents and see how they work pretty differently from workflows.
Yeah, and the real skill is which tools to use when and understanding their limitations and the benefits of each. Because I feel like it's not like workflows are bad and agents are good, or other way around.
Yeah,
It's just they have their own purpose, and you need to be able to assess which one is useful for a given situation, for a given problem. And I think the future is just going to be hybrid, where you'll have a blend of workflows, AI agents, or agentic AI. They have different purposes. It's right now about like just learning and playing with different ones. Because the better you understand, the better we can all put them to work.
definitely. Like, I wouldn't want anyone to replace their nightly ETL workflows, which take data and convert it from a database, put it in a warehouse or whatever, and try to build an AI agent to do that. Deterministic, scripted, automated workflows work amazing for that. And like you said, right tool for the right job.
Great. This was a quick discussion, but an important one. I love seeing the workflow you built in action with the AI agent piece of it, like what it was able to do, which was quite exciting. So I'm
Yeah, and the
excited to.
demo gods were with us today.
That's true. When you did the dry run, they were not.
Yeah. So lucky us.
Yeah, for sure. Right. I think with that, any other closing thoughts, or should we close this one?
No, I think we'll be back with more stuff around this topic. We still have to kind of think about evals, and there's so much to do. I'm just excited to continue experimenting and then recording these conversations with you.
Yeah, 100%. There's definitely more to come. So, but with that, we'll end this episode with over and out.